The evolution of shoes. Cave drawings from 15,000 years ago showed people wearing animal skins, or furs wrapped around their feet.
This was one of the oldest forms of shoes we have found so far.
However, we do not wear animal skins around our feet anymore, so now we are going to tell you about the evolution of shoes. The oldest shoe.
Like we said, 15,000 years ago, people probably used to wear animal skins around their feet, but they also wore the oldest crafted shoe called the sandal.
And people still wear sandals today. You can also find shoes like the animal skins people wore 15,000 years ago called moccasins, or as you might call them, loafers in a shoe store. The Renaissance shoes.
Leather was a very common fabric used for shoes during the Renaissance.
Shoes were fastened onto people's feet with hooks, buttons, and lace.
One kind of shoe that men wore during the Renaissance was called the slipper shoe. The slipper shoe looked a lot like the ballet shoe we see today. However, during the Renaissance, the slipper shoe was wider and more square.
Women mostly wore the slipper shoe during the Renaissance. Most of these shoes were made of silk or embroidered leather.
None of these were waterproof, which helped create the shoe called the pattern. It had a wooden sole, which is the bottom of your foot, and it also had an open vamp on the side of your foot. The shoe was tied with latches, or hooks to keep the strings tied.
Another kind of shoe that people wore during the Renaissance was called the chopine. It was a raised sole and was very, very popular in Italy and in Spain. 1715 to 1815 shoes. By this time, patent leather had been discovered in Europe, but not in North America yet.
In the 1780s, lighter leathers were used in color and construction. Colors such as red, yellow, and white emerged.
In 1800, women started to wear flats.
For men, most shoes were accepted.
Men's shoes had a pointed toe, and in France, the heel completely disappeared.
However, men complained that they needed some sort of heel, so eventually the heel for men's shoes came back.
In the 1820s, laces were very popular.
Most laces were black, and eventually the oval toe for men's shoes appeared.
Women, however, had more choices in terms of their shoes.
In the beginning of this period, women's shoes had very pointed toes.
In the 1790s, sandals were being worn again.
However, people still tried to hide their bare foot and cover it with lining.
But in 1813, people started to wear the Grecian sandal, which left the foot almost completely bare. 1815 to 1870 shoes. At the beginning of the period, metal eyelets for lacings were invented in 1823.
In 1874, the eyelet setting machine came into use.
In the 1830s, people used Indian rubber for shoes. And maybe the best invention for shoes, the sewing machine in the 1850s.
This made shoes much cheaper.
For men's shoes, the oval toe was still popular at the beginning of the time period.
This lasted until the 1850s, where the toe spring shoe, the toes were pointed up.
This fad only lasted about 10 years. Mostly men's shoes depended on the activity.
By this period, women's shoes varied more than men's shoes.
After Queen Victoria's death in 1861, darker shoes became more popular.
And ever since then, black has been a popular color for shoes. By 1870s, toes began to have a very broad, round toe.
Cloth top shoes began to be popular later in this period. They were either black or white satin and had a square toe with no heel.
However, every decade brought new differences for shoes during this time.
Shoes from the 1870s to 1914.
In the 1880s and 1890s, rubber for shoes became a novelty.
In the 1880s, steel springs were added to the arches to women's shoes to make them more durable.
During this period, Britain invented sizes for shoes. Then the U.S. followed only 2 years later.
Half sizes and widths were also invented during this period.
All of this ensured that people could get a better fit without having to pay extra for custom shoes.
Men's toes on the shoes were one of the only things that changed during this time period. It changed from the oval shoe to the pointed toe again.
However, by 1906, men were also offered a variety of styles.
Heels on men's shoes stayed at 1 inch and remained.
The Oxford shoe was laced or fastened with 3 buttons, coming up to the ankle. Most shoes were dark colors, but in the summer people wore white suede shoes, and in the 1890s, yellow became a popular color for shoes.
Then in 1910, suede became a popular fabric for shoes.
In the 1890s, heels became high again, sometimes being more than 6 inches.
In 1910, pumps were shoes with small heels and worn for daytime rather than nighttime.
However, shoes that kept feet uncovered were still indecent, and people thought sandals were not appropriate. This concludes the evolution of shoes.
Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yep.